Welcome back to Communicology. Today I would like to talk about power. And, we've always thought about power as this impressive thing that people have that they use over other people. And, one of the problems with power is, it's not a thing. It doesn't really exist. Like as a tangible thing. You just can't go out to just go buy a 6-pack of power. Now you can go back and buy energy drinks or buy batteries and, get something that creates or holds energy, sure. But what about power and the dynamics that we see with power? How do we try to truly understand power? So when I teach leadership classes, that's one of the big things that's hard to really work with students over, and that's grasping the concept of power. Because again, we think that we just show up and people are going to respect us and we're going to have all this power. And sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. But the problem is if we don't understand what power is, it's just not going to work out very well for us. So we need to be in a situation where we understand what power is. Then we can understand how to properly use it. And then we can also avoid abusing it. Because that's typically when we start thinking of power is when it gets abused. So have you ever been in a situation where someone has lorded their power over you? You tend to understand this concept pretty well, pretty quickly. So let's talk about power and what it looks like and what it means. Now, there is a big difference when you're looking at how people move into that leadership sphere or have that dynamic where someone is, above another person, at least in a moment. So you do have a difference between reward versus punishment. And then on the far extreme, of course, you have coercion. So in reward, of course, think of when you're trying to train a dog. You've got a couple different options. Trying to teach a dog how to sit. Well, you can keep little treats, and then you have them sit, maybe push their rear end down and say, sit, as they're doing it, and they stay there, and you give them a treat. And they try to stand up again, no, sit, and they do that, and you give them a little treat. You're rewarding their behavior, and they think, oh, this is good, okay? Now you got power over that dog, and you want to have it do the things that you want it to do, so you kind of teach it to do that, and you give it a reward. Every time it does something right, you give it a reward, and that's something that the dog tends to appreciate and tends to enjoy. So when it comes down to the punishment, when you have a puppy and they want to keep biting everything, well, how do you reward? You didn't bite me, so how do I give you, okay, you're not biting me, so here's a treat. I mean, they don't understand. They don't have the logic to figure that out. So typically they go to bite you and you give them a little bop on the nose and they're like, yep. And they realize, oh, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. And then they try biting you again, boop. And it's that quick little bit of punishment. They realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. And eventually they stop, ideally, right? So that's when we end up seeing reward and punishment. It's the same thing with when you're trying to raise children. And it's the same thing with teaching students. Here's the reward, so you get an A+. Here's the punishment, you get an F and fail the class. And so when people act in certain ways, you can offer them certain things. Or it could be on a smaller scale. So they answer a question in your class and you say, good job. That's a great question. Or whatever you happen to say to them. That's a reward, as opposed to some kind of a punishment. And it's well, why would you think that? That doesn't make any sense, and that's one way you can dissuade them from, participating again, obviously, but depends on how you use your reward and your punishment powers. The other option you have is the idea of coercion. Now, of course, that's where we start crossing an ethical line to where, some kind of abuse happens. And you see that kind of thing where people will abuse another person just because they have power over them and make them to do things they don't want to do, or do severe punishment to that kind of person. And we see that happen. And of course, that's something that we just, obviously ethically say, no, that's actually not a good thing to do. So we try to stay within the framework of reward versus punishment. Now, some people don't believe in punishment. You'll have people no, don't ever do the punishment because that leaves scars and things. But punishment, again, if properly done, shapes and mold us. We do need to have punishment sometimes because we do stupid things. That's what we as humans do. We can do stupid things. So a punishment sometimes shows us that there are consequences for the negative things. And so someone who has power over us will punish us. And that works. Because reward all the time doesn't always work, because sometimes we don't always necessarily equate that the reward and why it should work. Reward certainly has its place, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for every situation. Sometimes punishment has to happen. So when we look at power, though, as I said, you can't just go down to the store and pick yourself up a pack of power. It's one of those things that we give to other people, even though it doesn't exist tangibly. We just offer it up. So power comes in 3 different ways. So let's talk about those kind of things. First of all, we have legitimate power. Now, legitimate power is something where like a name or a title or something like that, gives the person that authority. So with legitimate power, you have a situation where someone who, let's say someone is elected and they become mayor or governor or president. So they've got that title, that president whoever, mayor whoever. They've got that title, that naming that goes with them, and it's clear. They have legitimate power in that situation, and that is a very important power to have, and it makes it very clear, and it makes it easy to understand, because we don't have co-presidents or co-governors or co-mayors. If someone is a governor, they're the governor, and we have them. On the negative side of things, well, it's hard to get rid of somebody when they have that kind of power. Sometimes it's hard to move them out of that situation, and it's a lot hard. It's a difficult process. Like we have to go through all these different steps, or wait until their next election and get them out or whatever. Or if you have someone at work who has a title, you have to figure out how to properly fire them in a legal way and all that kind of stuff. It's hard. It's difficult. Like I said, the plus is that everyone knows. It's very clear. There's no kind of weird dynamic of how they get it. We gave it to them. And that's what I mean about like just giving people things willingly. So if I vote for someone, that's an exercising of me giving them power. I could withhold a vote. I could give it to somebody else, or I can give it to someone else, or I could write in a goofy name and call that my official vote. But it's a way that I distribute power. Or I could hire somebody, and that gives them that title, Or I could fire somebody, or I could not hire them and hire someone else. Again, that's just a way that I give power, and I could do that kind of a thing. So with that, that understanding of power, I need to understand that there's also that responsibility that comes along, that once I do give it, I've given it. It's hard sometimes to take it back. So that's the first kind, legitimate power. So we have the name of the title, gives the power, no worries, they've got that authority. The next one is referent power, or referent power, however you wish to say it. The idea that I have admiration or respect for somebody, therefore they have power. So you think of an easy way, think of people that you respect. And it could be an easy thing, like there's this aunt or uncle that you care about and you respect them, or a grandparent, or one of your parents, or maybe that nice neighbor next door, or a business person in town, or a leader at church. And I respect you. Therefore, if you say things or ask of me things, I will do that. Well, that's a giving of power. So I respect you, ergo, you will, I will do what you ask me to do or tell me to do, because I respect you. And that's something that's important to me. Now, we typically don't think of that in the way of power, because that's more like a relationship. Well, power is a relationship. We just don't think of them that way, because we think of power, as this big thing that we tend to go after. But realistically, think of it this way then. You have a favorite singer. Think back 10 years ago. What were you doing 10 years ago? Who was your favorite singer 10 years ago? Is it the same singer now? Take a moment to think. 10 years ago, who are you listening to? What band, what singer? Is it the same one now? I bet it's not. It could even just go on 5 years ago. It's not the same one as today. So how do I understand that with referent power? Well, I respect you so much, I'm going to buy your music. I'm going to buy concert tickets. I'm going to buy the t-shirt. Whatever that I'm going to do, I'm going to spend money. Then after a while, I'm just like, well, this new band came out with this really cool song. I kind of like it too. So I'm going to buy their music and I'm going to buy their tickets and buy their t-shirts. This one still exists, but we are now shifting it over here. So we used to have admiration and respect for them, but now we're doing it over here. So you see these bands that come and then they just fade away. They didn't just die on their own or whatever. It's just that other band came along and we went, ooh, I'm going to chase them now. And as a population, we say that enough people do it. This person who could be super popular just eventually fades away. So same thing with sports heroes. Oh, I really love this player on this team. Buy the tickets, buy the jersey, all that kind of stuff. And then they get traded, or they get old, or they get injured, whatever. They quit, they retire, whatever. And then, well, I'll pick this one now, and I'll buy their jersey, and I'll go to see their games or whatever. And this one kind of just disappears. Just like the musician, and now we have this new one that we care about. So, yay, we like them. It's like, what about that guy? Oh, yeah, I remember. I used to cheer for that guy. I think I have the jersey still in the back of my closet. Or did I give that to Goodwill? So that's the kind of thing where you see that dynamic happen. I used to admire and respect you, and now I admire and respect you. So you have that situation with that exchange of power that happens through that. And we do that all the time. Again, it doesn't have to have money exchange. It could just be, like I said, with the uncle or the business leader that you respect. They ask you to do something, so you'll do it. So, but that exchange then does happen. But it's based upon respect. So that's the big thing. So I admire you, therefore you have power over me because I admire you. The last one is expert power. Now, expert power is fairly quite simple, but we just don't think too much of it and how easily it changes and how it can go away. You think, well, if I'm an expert, how do I lose that power? Well, perfect example. If my car runs well, I don't need a mechanic. That mechanic knows everything about my car and how to fix anything that goes wrong. But if it's running well, I don't need that mechanic. He has no power over me. Now, if my car breaks down, maybe I know how to fix it myself, then I still don't need the mechanic. But if something goes wrong and I can't figure it out, or I just don't have time, or whatever the situation is, now I need the mechanic. Oh boy, he now has expert power over me. And I'm at his mercy while he wrenches on my car. Same thing, got a toothache. Oh no, what am I going to do? I go to who? The dentist. Well, couldn't I go to a carpenter? I mean, they both own drills. They both know how to run drills really well. Well, in that situation, when you have a toothache, do you really want to go to the carpenter? I think you'd rather go to the dentist. So in that situation, the dentist has the power. Just like if you're building your house, well, the dentist knows how to run a drill, but the carpenter knows how to do framing and put up the house. The dentist does not. But it can take care of your teeth, though. So in those situations, I need expert power. So as you get towards tax season, all of a sudden a tax prep professional is your best friend. The whole rest of the year, you don't care about tax preparation professionals. You don't even think about them. They don't even exist in your radar. But you start getting towards April 15th, they've got tons of power over you. So it's one of those things where that's transferable like crazy. Now, sometimes you'll see even overlap over some of these things too. Like, for example, my role as a professor. I could have, of course, legitimate power. I'm given the title of professor. So in that classroom, I have actual legitimate power over my students because I've been given the role of professor by my university. They said, you will be in charge of this room. So I have that. Now, there could be referent power. They might look up to me and say, wow, you're a professor. You're pretty smart. I admire that. It's really respectable that you have that. But it's also expert power. That when it comes to like studying communication, I'm that guy, as opposed to like biology, which is not my thing, or nuclear physics, which is not my thing. Communication, that's my thing. I can do that. So when that all comes to play, in that moment, I've got all three of those kind of things. Now, if the students don't like me and, I still have legitimate power, whether you like me or not, because at the end of the day, I've got the grade book. So I've got the legitimate power. I also have the expert power. Whether you like me or not, that's irrelevant. Now, that referent power, if you don't like me, that's the one that goes away. But I still have those. Now, the other thing that comes into play, too, is when the bell rings. So at the start of class, now I have power. But at the end of the period, at 50 minutes later, and it's time to let you loose, I no longer have power. But wait, you might still admire me and that referent power. I didn't lose my expert power. I still know communications, not like it faded away at the end of the class period. But you now belong to another professor because after my class, you go to some other class. Now that professor has the legitimate power that just all of a sudden showed up, and I lost it because I can't go into the biology professor's classroom and say, hey, that student should get a C. I don't have any authority in that room. I've been given legitimate power in that particular classroom. So the classes that I've been set up to teach, those are the only places where I have legitimate power. So my students, I'm one of those big sticklers that when it gets to the end of class and class time, I let them out. I try not to ever hold them late. Even if I've got something super important I want to say, just put it off till next time. It was my problem for time management. So that's my fault, and I let them go because it's a value of their time. So, and I also realize that contractually, my time is up. My legitimate power has ended. And quite frankly, that's how I build more referent power because students appreciate that I don't hold them late. Maybe I'll even let them out a few minutes early and they'll like me even more, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, for power to work, we need to understand these three different levels. That legitimate power, the idea that the name or the title gives you the authority, or the referent power, that admiration and respect gives you power, or expert power, that your specific knowledge, has that kind of power. It's one of those things that if we don't understand how that works, how could we then possibly use it? Because there are times where I can walk into a situation and pretend I have power, but I'll seem pretty fraudulent and pretty phony, and you'll lose respect for me. And everyone hates the whole, don't you know who I am situation. Like when someone walks into a restaurant and don't you know who I am? They're trying to exercise power in that moment to get a better seat or something like that, or to get seated and not wait, or they get out of a speeding ticket and they tell the cop, don't you know who I am? It's like, in that moment, it's like, well, according to this driver's license, you're Richard Talbert. So what? It's not that you're the professor of the roadways or the professor over the law or the one that writes the cop his paycheck. I'm just Richard Talbert. So I'm just Joe Q citizen. So in that moment, though, I'm trying to use my power of don't you know who I am to get past that ticket. And that's where people start having a real sour taste of the concept of power. But power is a net neutral thing. It's how you use it. It's like however you choose to wield a hammer, however you choose to wield a baseball bat. You can do good things with it. You can do bad things with it. But at the end of the day, too, we have to realize it's also fragile because it doesn't truly exist and I could lose it. So I could lose my title and my power disappears. I could lose your respect and my power disappears. I could lose my skills and my power disappears. That's one of those things that if we realize how we have our power in the first place, and if we don't have power, how then can we gain it? If I don't have expert power, how do I get that? Maybe I can study a little bit more, read a little bit more, research a little bit more, and get that expert power. If I don't have that referent power, well, how can I get someone's respect? Think about how I can act with integrity and act with virtue and with goodwill and become a better person, maybe gain their respect that way. And if I want legitimate power, well, how do I get that title? How do I get that experience? Well, that's when you go and try to get a job and land that title, or you run for office and try to land that title. That way I have that kind of power, because otherwise we're just kind of, wandering around aimlessly trying to figure that out. So when it comes to power, though, it's also important to realize how we accept it. So when people try to exercise power over us, there are times that we say, yes, boss, you're the boss, I'll do what you say. And there's also the time of saying, actually, you have no power over me. And what do you think you're doing? And call people out on it who are trying to abuse their power. So those are things I want you to think about. Again, power, you can't tangibly grab it, but it is something that's powerful, and it is something that does matter, and it is useful. And it can make the world go around, but it also can damage things pretty quickly. So think about your power, how you got your power, how you can gain more power, how you can share your power, and see how you can go from there. That's all I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe, which is a way of giving me power. And if you didn't like what you heard today, that's okay. I'm glad you tuned in anyway. But that's all I have for Communicology.